All right, hi everyone. We have Blockstack coming up next, so I'm gonna bring Munib into the chat.
Thanks everyone. Munib here, co-founder of Blockstack, and these are some quick updates on the Blockstack ecosystem as of June. First of all, quick disclaimer that Blockstack is in this unique position where we did a qualified offering with the SEC last year, and even though we are listed and trade internationally, we also do full SEC reporting. As we just did an annual report with the SEC recently, and this disclaimer is that there might be some forward-looking statements here, and this is not an active offering, right? Like we're not selling anything here. So for those of you who are not that familiar with Blockstack, this is a quick snapshot. Think of this as Blockstack is software for a user-owned internet, and I did my PhD at Princeton University in distributed systems, and the project really started as exclusive R&D. So we raised capital to focus on some of the core infrastructure challenges, like the solid foundations that you need for truly building a scalable next generation internet. And around 2017 is when we started building out the infrastructure. So our phases of development were pretty much like explicit R&D, then building the public infrastructure, and now we're working on effectively fully decentralizing the network so that we can have a thriving ecosystem instead of just Blockstack PBC, the company, like taking the lead on developing some of this. So today I will mostly give you updates on the Stacks 2.0 blockchain, which is our master design, and some comments on our path to full decentralization. So before we get into anything, I think it's important to talk about our thesis in general. And at a high level, our thesis is that Web3 would actually get built around Bitcoin, and which might be somewhat of a unique perspective here, where clearly we have a lot of innovation happening in the Ethereum ecosystem. We also have a lot of other new protocols that are trying to tailor themselves for smart contracts or for building next generation networks like a Web3, whereas we still believe that Bitcoin actually has the not just the most secure blockchain, but also has really interesting network effects and a very healthy community around it. And it's very important to actually try to leverage that as much as possible. So a lot of our work has been on how do you enable basically scalable transactions for internet assets registrations, like if you want to register domain names or usernames or other types of assets on top of Bitcoin. Or how can you enable basically full smart contracts anchored to Bitcoin, right? So there's a very good reason for why Bitcoin's scripting language is very limited, or why you shouldn't be registering all sorts of digital assets directly on Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is designed the way it is so that it can function as a reserve cryptocurrency, so that it can function as a settlement layer, and the Stacks blockchain actually provides the missing features that are needed for actually enabling Web3 on top of Bitcoin, right? So in that sense, like I think we have a unique thesis that Bitcoin will end up winning in the Web3 space as well, and Stacks is the way to kind of like make it happen. So just an overview of the different token economics. I know Misari does a great job of indexing some of this information and providing a lot of transparency into it. So we have raised around 70 million in capital over the years, mostly divided between the 2017 offering that was limited to accredited investors and institutions, and then the first ever SEC qualified offering that we did in 2019. As I said, that our asset, the Stacks cryptocurrency, which is used to register these digital assets on the Stacks blockchain, along with powering the smart contracts, the Clarity smart contracts and executing them, they currently do not trade in the US, right? But international markets have a different legal framework, and in different jurisdictions around the world, Stacks already trades, and which leaves us in this unique position where we both do SEC public reporting while we have a live trading asset as well internationally. Some of the recent highlights, a lot of our work has been focused on the Stacks 2.0 blockchain. We released the Stacks 1.0 blockchain around fall of 2018, and that was a simpler version built on top of Bitcoin, whereas Stacks 2.0 is our master design. It is the blockchain that we wished existed when we were starting off, and really, really proud of the work our team has done here. And I think the best way to think about Stacks 2.0 is that the blockchain interconnects with Bitcoin, right? So it's not a side chain, it's not merged mine, it's a very different concept. This blockchain interconnects with Bitcoin. It basically reuses the security of Bitcoin and adds new types of features that cannot exist at the Bitcoin blockchain itself, right? And our testnet for the Stacks 2.0 chain went live recently. You can actually go and play around with it. And the main concept that we have introduced is proof of transfer. So think of proof of transfer as something very different from proof of work or proof of stake. Over here, what we are basically doing is we're trying to reuse proof of work. So Bitcoin miners have already done the work of kind of like creating an asset backed by proof of work. And instead of kind of like reinventing the wheel or making people kind of like do proof of work again, we're trying to reuse Bitcoin. We are trying to reuse the security of Bitcoin. And the way this works is that there are two types of parties. There are Stacks miners, and then there are Stacks holders who can participate in consensus as well. So what the Stacks miners do is that they use Bitcoin as a cost basis, right? So imagine that if you're a Bitcoin miner, your cost is in electricity, or your cost is in the upfront capital that you put in for setting up your rigs and so on. But if you're a Stacks miner, your cost is in Bitcoin, right? So you are mining the Stacks chain by spending Bitcoin and by committing Bitcoin, and your cost is expressed as Bitcoin. What happens to that Bitcoin is really interesting. Those Bitcoin are actually getting transferred to Stacks holders who are also participating in consensus, right? So that's why it's called proof of transfer. So I think an analogy would be if there was some sort of a consensus mechanism where Bitcoin miners, instead of destroying electricity, could send electricity to all the Bitcoin holders, right? And then electricity is usable and you can use it in other ways. So in this way, like this mechanism is actually more energy efficient, right? Because you're not destroying value, you're actually transferring value from the miners to the Stacks holders. And Stacks holders who are participating in consensus can actually earn Bitcoin rewards. What that means is that imagine that for proof of stake networks, you're putting certain assets on stake, and you can get slashed if you're not behaving properly. This is different. So you are locking up your Stacks capital to participate in consensus. You perform certain functions and add value to the network. But what you're earning is actually Bitcoin. So this goes back to our thesis of anchoring Web3 on Bitcoin. So the Stacks crypto asset and Bitcoin are also interrelated that way. Stacks holders can earn Bitcoin on their holdings, and Stacks miners use Bitcoin to actually participate in the mining process. And more details on this are available in our proof of transfer white paper that we released recently as well. So as I mentioned, that the Stacks 2.0 testnet went live. We are getting pretty close to mainnet, which is a very exciting milestone for our community. And I think the way we are working towards it is we have divided the testnet into discrete phases, and every couple of weeks we kind of like update our timeline for the mainnet. I know a lot of people in our Telegram and other community places ask a lot, like, when is mainnet going live? The best estimate roughly right now is mid-July to early August or so is the best timeline. And we keep the roadmap updated on our website, and you could go and basically get more information over there. So some of the other things that have happened in our ecosystem recently, obviously we did the first ever SEC annual report. Again, I think for those of you who are not familiar with the project, Blockstack was the first ever qualified offering in the US, meaning that we kind of like took all the regulations head on, worked with the SEC to come up with a compliant framework for how to do an initial token offering so that people can get access to Stacks, to use it on the network and in smart contracts and so on. And that took a while, right? Because imagine the securities regulations have been around since 1933, but our offering was the first offering where something other than equity in a company was actually being offered, right? So that was an offering for a crypto asset, not an offering for traditional equity in a company, right? So that took a lot of work from us, and as part of the offerings, we have an ongoing reporting requirement, which I actually think is a great thing for transparency, for actually reducing information asymmetry between the project and the rest of the public. So we report on our financials, any big events or business updates that should be disclosed to everyone. And the format there actually looks very similar to the kind of reporting public companies do. So if you want to dig deeper, you can go to our website and our blog and check out our SEC report. And we also have a summary for the report as well, where you can look at the major happenings in 2019. So the interesting thing over here is that the Stacks cryptocurrency is pretty much a utility token, right? Much like Ethereum or Bitcoin. And it is treated as such internationally. So over time, the reports that our company Blockstack PBC files actually start to become less relevant, right? Because the work that a single company is doing in a decentralized ecosystem actually doesn't matter that much, right? The network is already open source, the code base, and the network is decentralized, especially with the launch of Stacks 2.0. So the role that our company plays in the ecosystem actually diminishes over time as the network becomes more and more decentralized. And we are working on releasing more details on this as well. Some numbers on recent growth. So as I said, that we did R&D work, then built the public infrastructure. And last year, we started getting a lot of independent applications built on the network, right? So we went from something like 20 applications to more than 400 applications now. And our company, Blockstack PBC, actually does not build any applications, right? So these are all independent players. They are all the way from startups that have raised some capital to just and some engineers who are kind of like working nights and weekends and trying to learn Web3 applications and building applications on top of the network. Yeah, so our team has grown a lot. Like the project has been around for the last 7 years or so. And the early team was mostly computer scientists as we were doing R&D. Some came out of Princeton where I did my PhD as well. And then over time, we started adding all sorts of like other skill sets when we were building the public infrastructure and slowly kind of like building out the community as well. So in some ways, just like we took a unique approach on the regulation side, we've also taken a fairly unique approach on the R&D and the technology side as well. Like I think instead of like a lot of hype and marketing and flashy white papers, this has been the reverse of it, where we did most of the hard work up front as clear R&D, and now have those solid foundations where Web3 apps on our network can scale to hundreds of millions of users even today. And we are very proud of the work that we were able to do. Along the way, we have filed certain patents as well as a company, and these are mostly for defensive purposes. So I know this made news recently that Blockstack PBC was getting a couple of patents. So we have released a patent pledge where we basically lay out that all of this work was done to protect the community and to protect any large monopolies from coming in and being a hassle for the people who are in our community trying to build applications and so on. So all of our patents actually belong to you, and anyone can freely use them, and we only plan to use them for defensive purposes for our community. We've done a lot of work recently on the future governance of the blockchain. So we have launched, or rather the community working with Brittany and Lane and some other people have launched an independent Stacks Foundation. Blockstack PBC, the company, will be making an initial donation of Stacks to the foundation and providing some working capital, but we do not control this foundation at all. It has a completely separate board. It has its own charter, and basically it becomes the entity that looks at future protocol upgrades for the Stacks 2.0 blockchain, and becomes a permanent home for the community and for kind of like being an independent voice in our ecosystem. So as I mentioned, that in terms of our roadmap, the two big things we're focused on is the launch of the Stacks 2.0 mainnet and further decentralization and more importantly, legal frameworks around decentralization, because we want to make sure that we are compliant. Just like we did the SEC offering earlier, we want to make sure that we kind of lead the way for the industry in terms of defining what even decentralization looks like from a legal perspective. And with that, I will take some questions.
Perfect timing. Yeah, I just hopped in here to start the Q&A session. So yeah, thanks for running through that. That was and that was a good clip too, because I remember seeing that was very similar to the presentation that you put together after the SEC filing a couple of weeks back.
Yeah, I think that was the most relevant presentation to modify for this.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. That's excellent. So I actually had a question on the proof of transfer side. Do you see a potential maybe challenge bringing on SDX miners on that side? Because I see plenty of people that may want to stack SDX tokens, but on the other side, trying to get miners onto the platform. And is there any plan for that?
Yes. So I think I know that there's a little bit of a psychological thing that people don't want to let go of their Bitcoin, right? Yeah. Because you're spending Bitcoin to mine here. But I think basically this is a cost factor. So think of that as there's a profit margin. So if people are not participating in mining, they're leaving money on the table in the sense that there's already a BTC STX exchange pair on Binance and KuCoin and other places. And there is actually more real-time feedback. So miners can actually enter and exit our system faster than a traditional proof of work miner, because there's no upfront capital cost. You can just like enter and exit when you. So I think in our conversations, we're actually noticing interest from people who have background in trading or automated algorithms for even writing bots. And I think it's a marginal profit game, right? If there is marginal profit to be gained, people will come in and actually utilize that opportunity.
Oh yeah, I get it. Makes total sense. Yeah, I kind of have like an arbitrage play right there. Yeah, it's it's a very interesting design, and I'm really interested to see how it plays out more on the test net that's going on right now. So yeah, a big announcement with the Stacks Foundation, and with that, a couple of questions coming off of that. How does Blockstack PBC kind of fit into the future plan kind of going on now that development's kind of be handed over to the foundation, and how does the foundation kind of fund itself and its growth and development going forward?
Yeah, so I think as I mentioned that when we were starting the project, even when we got initial funding, it was very clear that there is a big R&D component to the project, right? So we were explicitly doing R&D, phase one. Phase two is building the public infrastructure, and phase three is decentralization, like decentralizing into an ecosystem, right? So imagine that there's a company we want to build, but the company needs to operate in an ecosystem that doesn't exist yet. So you're first kind of like helping kickstart the ecosystem, and now PBC, the Public Benefit Corp, in our community, people just call it PBC, the company. So PBC actually narrows down its scope on developer tooling, and mostly developer tools that are built on top of the Stacks blockchain, so that we don't have a monopoly over kind of like the development of the Stacks blockchain itself. So one of the core developers of the Stacks blockchain has also moved to the foundation, and then there might be other entities as well who are kind of like helping with the development of the blockchain itself, right? So PBC has basically taken hands off from the blockchain, and we are saying we're reducing our scope to just building developer tools on top. And other entities in the ecosystem are going to play several other roles. So the foundation might not be the only independent entity. There might be more as well.
Got it. No, that sounds great. All right. So I think that's all the time we have. One last question. How can people keep in touch and stay up to date with the project?
Yes. So I think blockstack.org is the main website. We're pretty active on Twitter. I'm on @Munib, which is my first name. And Blockstack is @Blockstack.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us. Really, really appreciate it.